sure Batman the Animated Series. I I grew up, my dad read comic books and it kind of started me off with the animated series cartoons to kind of get into the comic book world. And I remember him just being like, well, if you like watching this, you could read them every single week. So that was kind of the start for me of Batman having a huge impact in my life, and still to this day, obviously, getting to work with DC Daily and DC All Access and chat with these lovely folks. What about for you, Tom?
I think it's kind of fucked up. I'm sorry, but it's I think my parents for some stupid reason bought me Dark Knight Returns when I was so young. I must have been like 8 years old, and they're like, "Here, you'll enjoy this. It's about death and murder." And
I think for me, the thing that was so amazing was that there was always a Batman for the era I was going through. I grew up in New York City in the 80s, so Dark Knight Returns and Year One made Batman immediate and urgent and real to me. And then when I was in college, the animated series kept me involved, and then Grant stuff really brought me back after that. So the adaptability of Batman was always the thing that sort of made him so special. There was always this kind of drawback, because at core, he's about a guy who has suffered this tragedy, this thing that happened to him that makes anyone feel like there's no sense to the world. Somebody comes and kills your parents over nothing. And yet he turns his life into this engine of meaning. And that core thing is so easily, I think, translatable to multiple kinds of things, whether it's like cartoony silliness, or the 60s, Adam West stuff, or any of it.
Stuff. I have to take objection. TV show was very serious.
It was serious to me too. The best con I ever had was here. It was like 5 years ago I met Adam West. Dan DiDio, I remember, was like, I was still on Batman. He was like, do you want to meet Adam West? And I was like, absolutely. There's nobody I want to meet.
Reruns, but I didn't know they were reruns. And it's a King Tut episode, and Batman is just trapped in an iron mummy, and it's closing in on him, and it cuts away, and like find out next time. And I remember as a kid being like, wow, I just watched the last Batman episode. Like, he's not gonna get out of that thing. And I remember my mom coming home, like, Mom, I saw the last episode of Batman. It was he died. And then you watch 72, and I'm like, oh, that's what a cliffhanger is. He's slowly learned to write that way.
And you're like, that's why I decided I wanted to write Batman.
That's right. So when you write Batman, you're like, if I can get someone to that point I was when I was 8 years old, we're like, wow, did Tom just write the last Batman story?
I don't know. You heard it here first. The other Cecil Castellucci, your comic comes out next week, the first issue of Batgirl.
First one, yeah.
So give us a little bit of what people can expect in the coming months with Batgirl.
Well, I'm coming in on Year of the Villain, so you can expect some villains.
Yeah.
Yeah, some stuff is happening in the DC universe, and so Batgirl. I think what you can see is that she's really going to be challenged and shaken to her core, which is sort of what's happening. And I can't really say too much. But I just do want to speak about Batgirl for a minute, because when you talk about Batman and him coming from trauma, with his parents dying, and Robin as well, and and Damian, and all the Robins. Batgirl, even though she's derivative from Batman, she's very much her own person, and she's very independent, and she's very resilient. She's a very resilient character. She's got a lot of growth in her that she does. She's constantly evolving, and that has to do with like her, her incredible memory and her brawn. But she really is a scrappy, independent person who, yes, came from a fractured family, but did not deal with the same things. And so, what I love about Batgirl is that she's sort of putting the bat symbol on her was sort of an immediate way to sort of be like, okay, you're a vigilante and you can swing through the city and get stuff done, but she very much functions, I think, in her own sort of way. And so I think she's a proud Bat family person, but she doesn't have that same relationship with Batman that the Robins do. And I just love her. And so yeah, I'm excited.
I mentioned Scott earlier today in a couple different times. One person was like, you you've taken on this character, and so much has been done with it. You know, isn't it impossible to do anything, you know, new and fresh? And I go, obviously this guy didn't read any of our work, because I think Scott was brilliant when he created Court of Owls. And I'll tell you, you know, Batman is very overconfident that nobody knows Gotham better than he does, right? He's arrogant, to a fault, Scott proved, by introducing the court, which has been there underneath his nose and been there for 400 years. And I go, that's how you do it. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. But I said, I go, I mean, and I, you know, I give the credit to Scott. I mean, I drew the story, but he conceived that, and I really, and I'm not saying it because my friend, I'm puffing him up. I think that was brilliant, and so I go, it can always be done. I mean, not better than Scott has done it probably for a very long time, right, Scott? Now I'm kissing up everybody. But anyway, and I said it again in an interview, and so I'm very proud to be involved with Court of Owls and to be a collaborator with Scott, because I think that was a genius idea, and he's got just a whole bag of ideas that I think are just great. So yeah.
Well, I think the thing about Batman that makes him so enduring is that he's a really simple concept. It's that you take the things that are traumatic to you and you turn them into fuel to make you win, and that's it. You know, that's the basic bottom line of Batman that makes him everlasting. You know, he's a folktale in that way. And the thing that's great is that you might not love every version of Batman. You might not, you know, relate to, or you relate, but you might not, you know, completely get every take on him. Like whether it's Grant or me or Tom or, you know, Denny or anybody, or Frank. But that core thing is so simple that it's adaptable to so many different interpretations. And the thing that I love about being able to do our last story with, you know, Last Night on Earth is that it comes full circle. We began with a story that was very much about a group of villains, the Court of Owls, that said, the people don't know best. And at the end, with Last Night, we're dealing with a future in which everybody has decided that the villains are their real shepherds and the heroes are no longer needed. And so it is one kind of conversation with the idea of Batman. What makes us overcome the things that make us afraid, make us, make us feel that we're less than we are, and triumph? How do we turn those things that make us terrified into fuel? And so I love this book. I'm really proud of it. The second book has everything from like Lex Luthor 20 years in the future, where he's conquered Brainiac and he's bringing Superman rockets here right and left, and he's trying to sort of revive Superman, and it has the underworld with the Spectre's cloak and everybody that's died in the DCU. It's got like, I don't want to spoil too much. I feel like I already did, but it's like, it's sort of the entire DCU seen through the lens of what Batman means, you know. And to me, as much as we all criticize or sort of get on DC sometimes for putting Batman forward in front of Superman or Wonder Woman, and I love those characters equally, and I think they're equally powerful and important. The thing that I think makes Batman so immediately relatable is that he's a human story. He said, you know, he doesn't have powers, he's not a god, he's not an alien. He's a person who had something terrible happen and said, I'm going to use this as protein to be stronger, and that's it. And so this story is very much a kind of full circle on everything Greg and I have done on the entire sort of mythos of Batman. And I think it's the best thing. I really do believe it's the best thing we've done, and I'm really, really proud of it. And I'm so grateful to you guys, like the fact that you sold it out and made it, you know, do as well as it has done, and all of that. Like, you know, you guys have been with us. You're the best fans in the world. We've had you for 10 years. Thank you so much. You've seen like him through, you know, all kinds of stuff. You see me through a new kid and like all kinds of shit. Like, we really appreciate it. So thank you again. This one, I promise, like, we're giving it everything we have.
Reading it or seeing it on a show or whatever your connection is with that. Mine would definitely, it has to always be, and I know it's a flip-flop because I think a lot of people say The Killing Joke, but I loved Pain and Prejudice. I loved reading about Penguin's story, and so for me that is a really iconic Bat villain story for me.
My favorite villain? I really love Kite Man, guys. I'm sorry. I apologize. Hell yeah. I love writing him.
Don't apologize.
He's in the next issue, and yeah, because he's Charlie Brown, man. He's the opposite. He never gets to kick that football, and I think that would create the worst villain in the world. Yeah, Kite Man. Hell yeah.
Historically, mine's always been the Riddler. There's this beautiful idea I've always had in my head that I tell Tom he needs to write, but like it's a thing he'd have to like go to a cabin for a few years and figure out.
I think he's just trying to get me to a cabin for a few years.
But it's like the smartest like Riddler story you've ever read, where like as you uncover clues, the reader is like, holy shit, you combine this to this and this. But lately, my answer has changed to Professor Pig. It's terrifying. And then, like, you give terrifying ideas to Tom King, and then they become a new thing that keeps you up, and yeah.
I feel like to get him to the cabin, you need to get the tequila that Scott used.
It's all gone.
And then you might get your Riddler story.
Everywhere.
Well, I'm gonna do a Batgirl villain, which is the new villain that's coming up, because Batgirl, her whole rogues gallery is mostly Batman ones, and so I'm really excited about her, you know, sort of getting her own. So yeah, next week.
I like a lot of times when he fights, I like the creature type villains a lot. I think it works in response to what a human character he is. There's something fun about seeing him against something so inhuman, and it's almost like the fun is watching him get written out of a corner to something that a human being couldn't possibly comprehend, much less face. But even saying that, I feel like so many of his villains are twisted in a way that they work in the same capacity. Somebody like Joker, or even the brilliance of somebody like Riddler, it still works in the same capacity of, like, you know, a human facing something so vastly beyond themselves. But Man-Bat and Clayface, guys like that, I eat up.
It's funny, sometimes it seems like a pat answer, but a lot of times, whatever I'm writing, like be it now I'm working on the Freeze stuff for the villain stuff, and I'm really getting into Mr. Freeze a lot. I did a lot of work with Bane in Arkham War and a bunch of other stuff, and I ended up really getting into Bane. And then, of course, when Scott and Greg did The Death of the Family, and I got a chance to do Joker in those 2 issues with Robin, and that voice in my head has always kind of stuck, and it was a blast to write the Joker. And I just did 1008 thing, is a one shot with Doug Mackey drawing the Joker, and this really cool bit where we go back to the park, to the amusement park, where we know what happened. So yeah, it seems to be a lot of times you get into the gear that I always try to really find that the villain I'm working on, I really like to immerse myself in, and it becomes my favorite at that time, who I never would have imagined would have bumped up the list really quickly. So and Two-Face also had a blast working with Two-Face in a big 5-part arc back on Batman and Robin. So the one it's almost like the kid that's in the car with you sometimes. Is the one, yeah.
I was gonna say, you're like, I'm not gonna pick a favorite. I'm just gonna, if I just sit up here and be like, well, this time it was this villain, and this time it might have been this one.
Yeah.
But you have to fall in love with what you're working on a little bit. So it naturally has to be your absolute favorite.
Yeah, it does
agree.
tend to work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about Batman's Rogues Gallery is that, to me, it's the only one where every villain is sort of a clear psychological extension of him. You know, where Two-Face is the duality of his life, Joker is the fear that nothing matters, you know, all of it. Like, the Penguin is sort of a play on the fact that he's like a rich boy playing hero. All of it is so potent, you know, that it's almost a template for how to write a good villain if you're not writing Batman. That everybody is so fun to write. for me, it's I guess I'm torn because I love writing new villains like Court of Owls or Batman Who Laughs, who I'm like immersed with right now, and he's sort of more evil than the Joker, so he's a lot of fun for me to write, especially with like a new baby and everything, where I'm like, I'm up at 2 a.m, I'm gonna be mean. And then also the classic villains, Joker has always been my favorite because regardless of whether you sort of are looking at my version of Batman, our version of Batman, Tom's version of Batman, Grant's version of Batman, Joker is always sort of the polar opposite in some way, where he approaches and says, whatever you are at this moment, I'm your opposite. So he's always my favorite out of the classics for that reason, and that's why he's been such a staple of our stuff.
With me, he's got all the best villains. Batman has all the best villains, so I love them all. But from a visual perspective, you know, what's fun to draw enters into the mix, right? And I like big characters, so he's finally given me a chance to draw Bane. Finally, it's taken it 10 years, and you know, so you know, I've had bits with Scarecrow and Penguin, which Penguin's a blast to draw, you know. But the one where I always, you know, was going, why is he so stingy? How much Catwoman have you ever given me to draw? I think I got like a cameo panel once, right? That's about it. It's like all testosterone-fueled Batman villains. Right? So I'm going, I would love to have done Catwoman, you know, just because there's a whole different component to going from the female angle. But yeah, I loved, if you've seen last night, Bane, he's got the top of his head chopped off, so he's like
Lobotomized.
Yeah, so he's got a flat top. And Scarecrow has no lower body, and his hands are like long needles. He walks around like a spider. His head's like in a plastic bag. You know what I mean? It's just like, so he gives me all this great, creepy, cool stuff. So I'm scratching 2 itches with that. I got the big character, and I got the creep factor with the Scarecrow. But at some point, I mean, we got to come back.
Catwoman is in book 3.
Okay, finally.
She really is.
For more than one panel.
Everyone in this room heard it.
It's already, I finished it. It's done. She's in there.
Awesome.
What